Yeah, that's right, I'm talking about this. Howdy, it's Tanya, and in my last video I said Burnout 1 is underrated, and you know what? I'm gonna stand by that. Now, I still think that the other Burnouts are better, but you know, that is what a sequel is supposed to do. It's supposed to improve on what was there before, and they do. But I genuinely think that this game is a good PS2 racer by itself. Here's the obligatory bit where I say the words thrill drive, and everyone who's in the comments is about to tell me it's a cheap knockoff are going to have to clean themselves, because I know that there's big links, but you know, that's not what I'm here to talk about. Now, I'm here to talk about sort of reviewing the game as a whole, and then I get into the real meat of the video, which is the music. Very excited to talk about that, and I will put a timestamp on right there, right in the video, right now. You can see it on the screen to let you know how to get to the music bit. But first, a quick little review of the game itself. I think the cars handle nicely, gameplay's solid fun, though with its quirks, and the races are long and tense and not particularly easy. The menus and UI are a bit basic looking with their impact font, but they're clean. There aren't that many cars or tracks, but they make up for it in depth. Each car has its own strengths and weaknesses and quirks, and they aren't given visible stats, but rather you're just told what difficulty the car is, which reminds me of arcade cabinets, which makes sense. However, there are only 9 cars, which isn't that many, and they don't have names other than the type of car they are, although at one point in development they did. That was scrapped for some reason. The game runs at a perfect 60 frames per second the whole time, which is a breath of fresh air for racing games at the time, a lot of which only ran at 30 or 20 in PAL regions, which I'm in, so I was pretty used to 20. Going back to like Need for Speed Underground 2 on the PlayStation, I was like surprised by how low the frame rate was sometimes. This was run on renderware, and it runs so well on renderware because they created this engine. They created this whole engine, which was then later used in a lot of great games. The visuals are a bit basic, but they are serviceable, and it looks like a pretty normal PS2 game, pretty decently. On the GameCube it looks good, and on the Xbox it looks good too. Obviously it's not got the craziest graphics, but for what it is, it's fine. Now the cars, you've got the Super Mini, which is slow but easy to drive, front wheel drive. You've got the Sports Coupe, which is a bit faster, handles alright. It's rear wheel drive, a bit more sensitive, and you can spin out with it if you want. You've got the Muscle Car, which is faster still and harder to drive. It's actually quite stiff in the corners. You can't really drift it quite as well. You can't get that angle. You've got the pickup truck, which is quite slow, not particularly nimble, but it is quite strong and can take a hit. And you got the Saloon, it's a bit faster, a bit heavier than the Super Mini, not particularly agile. Later you can unlock the Roadster, very responsive even, has good acceleration. Personally my favourite. The Saloon GT, very fast, a little bit slower than Muscle, almost as fast, but for some reason you can't Ross Chastain grind along a wall because it will dramatically slow you down. And then you've got 2 special cars, not cars, the tow truck and the bus, both of which are very slow to accelerate, but you can get away with a bit more contact due to their weight. They're not really there to win with, they're more for fun because they're really slow, but maybe it'd be interesting to do like a challenge, like can you beat Burnout with a pickup truck, with the tow truck, or with the bus? Personally, I have not managed to win a race with either of these vehicles. It just is too slow. But maybe someone better than me could. The tracks, they're long, they're actually connected. There's 5 locations which have reverse and different time of day versions, and then 2 marathon tracks that combine them together And that's really interesting. It's not something I've often seen done. I love tracks with different layouts, but this is like doing that, but on a crazy level. When I was young and played this, I struggled with the checkpoint timer a bit, but now it's fairly easy. I've never really had any issues. The tracks themselves are pretty interesting too. Interstate's got a lot of long straights where dodging traffic is the name of the game, and because it's the first track, the fact that it starts off with a long straight stretch of highway without any oncoming traffic serves as a useful tutorial level. Harbour Town is more about taking twisty rural corners and seeing that the apex of a corner may well be blind and there'll be a traffic car for you to crash into on the racing line. River City is narrow and tight as an urban place with multiple places where traffic actually crosses your path in a perpendicular lane, and you'll have to consider that. Euro Marathon combines both Harbour Town and River City into one long track, which is a tricky one but a lot of fun. Gridlock USA is wide, it's got a lot of traffic, a lot of 90-degree corners and some narrow alleyways, but it's not too difficult overall. And Hillside Pass, very twisty. The racing line contains lots of crossing onto the other side of the highway with barriers, so you've only got certain entrances. And then finally, USA Marathon, longest track in probably the whole series, combining Interstate, Gridlock USA and Hillside Pass. And then you race through, the reverse, the different times of the day, the different weather, with USA Marathon EX, the reverse, being at night and in the rain, making the grip actually a bit lower. Very, very interesting. The game's crashes are more primitive than the later iterations, with basic body deformation, no bits that come off, though the windows do smash and the cars do smoke. The sounds of crashing, crunching and screeching are actually very loud and visceral, and the crash physics are pretty good, with a nice feeling of momentum being conserved and movement, especially considering the age of the game. You'll spin out and keep spinning and do barrel rolls and flips and everything, quite a lot. And something that hasn't been repeated in later Burnouts, which I kind of wish it was, is you get to see the value of the crash in real time as you're crashing. So that's the amount of damage that you deal, your car being worth 20,000, so that's the minimum, and then every other car sort of adding onto it depending on how much you crash into them. And then a crash replay feature at the end of the race, both of which are things I wish we could have seen in later games. Imagine you get to the end of the race and then it shows you a list of all of your crashes, and you get to watch them in slow motion with a free camera, speed up, slow down, go backwards. It's actually really cool. I definitely wish we could have seen it later, especially in the later games, given that they have more exciting and spectacular crashes. The other sounds, engine sounds pretty basic, but you can hear the whooshing of passing cars by, which is a pretty neat touch alongside the Doppler effect of horns. And when you boost, all of the music starts to fade away and is replaced by a repetitive beep and heartbeat, which really emphasises the difficulty of travelling at a higher speed like this. Although the highest speed you can actually achieve is 150 miles an hour, which I'm sure was a lot at the time, but cars can go a lot faster nowadays. Overall, it's a pretty good game, an enjoyable little pickup for, let's check the price at release. $50? Wait, so accounting for inflation, that's $90? £67 sterling in 2025. That is almost as much as Mario Kart World. Oh, jeez. But what I'm really here to talk about is the music. As a musician, I find this game to have very interesting music. For starters, when you race on a particular track, there'll be two music tracks the game chooses from a normal one and a tragic one, which starts normally after you've crashed about 4 times throughout the race. And I think it's 8 times on a marathon track. That tragic track will then continue throughout until the end. However, instead of simply looping, it will actually restart from a particular point every time you cross some certain checkpoints throughout the track. Now, all of these tracks get more intense towards the end of the song, which means that if you're doing worse and getting to the checkpoints with little or no time to spare, you'll be hearing the more intense version of the theme more often. And from experience, it has a pressuring effect on the player, causing you to get more hot and bothered and make more mistakes, spiraling into this panicked state of mind where every corner is an enemy. Once easy traffic now becomes just in the right place to hit you, and you start sweating, frustrated, cursing perhaps, as that lead you once had starts to just slip away until that's it, you've lost. I think a lot of people get turned off by this game's music. Burnout 2 has incredibly fun butt rock, and then the rest of the games after that have licensed EA tracks, which is so darn good, and presents the games as these insane, intense, fast-paced fun, and yet instead of reflecting some kind of tragedy, showing that you are dying and killing people through your actions, like in number 1. Rather, this is the coolest way to run, that a crash is merely something that happens, an obstacle, a roadblock, a minor inconvenience that will lose you only time. Burnout 1 nails the intense vibe in a way unmatched by the rest of the series, which goes for that more fun vibe. So let's take a look at some of these tracks. I also went ahead and gave my own little spin on some of them as well. There are 10 in-race tracks, and then there's the menu, the credits music, and some unused ones. Overall, I think Stephen Root and Steve Emney did a great job on a lot of it. They're credited for composition, production, and mastering. Most of the songs are made with a fairly basic synthesizer, combined with sampled guitars, bass guitars, drums, and keyboards. The drums in particular are sampled recordings of Steve Emney, sometimes with a synth kick layered on top of it, and then mixed in different ways depending on the track. You may recognise Stephen Root from his other credits for music in games like Revolt, Extreme G, and the Die Hard trilogy, as well as being the audio director for many of the Codemasters racing games, from Dirt 2 to F1 2021. Let's take a look at the menu theme first and switch over to my DAW. It's in E minor melodic at 135 beats per minute, and it starts off with this simple repeated arpeggio and a pure sine wave layered with a repeating E note. Now, if you don't understand what all of this means, that's okay. The sine wave is the simplest kind of sound wave with just one harmonic frequency. Think of it like an apple, simple but delicious, and can also be transformed into other things with their own taste too. Now we bring in a beat and a bass line. The beat actually starts off with some echoes before going in fully. Now the break beat, that is a sampled beat, in this case, does not include a very prominent kick bass drum, and it has an interesting effect applied to it. If you listen to it in isolation, you can kind of hear it sounding a bit strange, robotic, alien even, like certain frequencies have been removed or accentuated, and that selection is constantly being changed. This is an example of a flanging effect, and it's not something you often see applied to a breakbeat. What's happening is that the beat is being played twice at a slightly different and variable time, with the second going from slightly ahead to slightly behind, and this has the effect of cancelling out the phase of some of the sound, creating a slightly metallic, resonant sound. Later on in the song, This flanger is removed and then reapplied at regular intervals. The bass line is similar to a triangle wave, which emulates the classic 808 bass you might hear in a hip-hop track or something. And then a saw pluck, which is introduced, has some echo to it, and after that you hear a very low octave saw wave introduced with a resonant low pass filter that kind of sounds like an acid bass. I think a lot of these tracks have been overlooked. It's not great, a bit out of place. Obviously it's different in tone to the rest of the series, which focused on rock, punk, metal, a little bit of electronic. Burnout 1 has a cold, intense, horror almost feel to it. Some of the tragic tracks were honestly pretty scary to me as a kid. This whole game kind of was. Often I was too scared to play, but then I was particularly wimpy kid too. I hesitate to call it trauma, but this game was a big point of fear for me when I was young. Feeling intense empathy and sadness for the cars, as if they'd actually died, and the horror music reminding me, of course, of real horror, leading to a huge amount of fear and dread. The track, Dead Ahead, caused skulls and danger of death signs in front of the interstate highway to flash in front of my eyes, alongside nightmares of mangled cars and dead eyeless faces. The track Fatal Instinct was the worst of the lot, causing cold chills to run down my spine, and I had to stop playing the song in the in-menu music player before it even reached its halfway point, because I simply could not bear to hear it anymore. Still today, I get a shiver when listening to that one. So let's say you're driving on River City. Before you crash 4 times, you have your casual track. Officially it's called 0260, though in Burnout Paradise it was renamed and called Halfway to Dreaming because of, it was owned by Acclaim, the copyright. But, so they renamed it and used the same track and basically got around those copyright issues. All these tracks they've got a mono version, a stereo version, and an option for Dolby Surround, with minor differences in mixing, and occasionally some extra sounds. For example, one version of 0260 contains a sine wave, reminiscent of the menu theme. But once you've crashed 4 or so times, the track will then transition to the track Oversteer, or Leon, which is what it's called in Burnout Paradise, which is a lot more menacing. So let's break out the old music brain hyperfixation, go into detail on each in-game racetrack with the DJ deck and stem separation to show off a few bits too. What we can see is that the tragic version of each track actually includes part of the same beat sample and shares a lot of similarities with the corresponding casual version. If we listen to 0260 and Oversteer using the stem separation to just hear the drums, we observe a similar nature to them, although they are mixed differently. I'll try to show where parts of the soundtrack are referenced or repeated in the tragic track from the casual one as we go. Now, the first track you might hear is probably 66 Kicks, as Interstate is the first listed track and the first one in the championship mode. Okay, serves as a good tutorial stage. First road you drive on, simple straight highway, not many curves, no oncoming traffic. You can understand the game in a less punishing start. Moves on to some 90-degree bends which will catch you out, then you get a choice to continue on the right hand side of the road, or gamble in the oncoming lane. The soundtrack also provides a bit of that feeling, with 66 kicks being fairly upbeat, unassuming. It even has this section in the middle with a fast drumming banjo as you're speeding down the highway, really making you feel like things are going to be alright. There are some synths mixed in, such as the sine wave, which appears a lot in this game, and a filtered saw. Then you crash 4 or so times, maybe even at the start, and everything changes. The beat is still there, but the upbeat guitars are replaced by violins with very aggressive attacks and high-pitched sound, while haunting grand pianos are playing at a very low octave, a very low sound. And by the end of the song, once you're reaching that pressure moment, dissonance starts to come into play, making the song's tension skyrocket as its loudness increases too. The violins become temperamental and chaotic. The key changes, the synths get louder, and then either you finish or you run out of time. It works really well to set the tone for the game as a whole. This is the song Whiplash. Next, in Harbour Town, you'll hear the song Euro Rush, and it starts with a melodic synth tone in E minor, alongside some soft choral R's, and a guitar that plays a melancholy melody. This is a sleepy European town. Perhaps it is Spanish. And you should feel a little upset about the chaos your actions are about to bring. And about a minute in, you hear a long sustained guitar ascending and then holding the high note for a while before we get back into quite a groovy little beat. And then if you successfully do bring the chaos, you'll get the tragic song Heart Failure, which starts off with that ascending guitar with a synth tone that descends at the same time. Often, but not always mind you, melodies with little steps up, or with a trending upwards are somewhat lighter in tone and a little tense, and melodies with steps down are darker and more dramatic, but this is not always the case. The guitar ascends and then the strings are brought in, which play this dramatic melody consisting of descending steps, while a similar beat plays and a distorted guitar provides an unsettling background. Once we reach the tension point, the beat steps up a notch in intensity and we get this wah-wah guitar, and right at the end that dissonance comes in once again, which really makes you panic, going from a slightly melancholic melodic song to more of a tragic song reminding you of death and destruction is certainly an interesting one, and it, well, provides a lot of emotions. The third track you will visit is River City with, of course, 0260 and Oversteer, which we've kind of talked about already, but I'll briefly cover. 0260, in terms of emotion, is fairly neutral, but does bring this nice, funky tune, and a 1-3-4 chord progression to the mix, which is super effective on me, specifically. And Oversteer is, once again, menacing. You've got your strings, but this time they're paired with a constant, repeating and dynamic acid sound, which exists quietly in the casual track. And then it brings a pitched down choral vocal. It's quite lo-fi and sounds really quite unsettling with a bit of a wobbly vibrato and that low quality mono sound. After that, you'll head to the USA again with the track Hillside Pass. The casual track's really quite chilled out and has a pretty cool rock song towards the end. As you might have been able to notice, each music track is split up into 3 segments. The first minute or so is the lowest intensity and plays as you're the furthest away from the timer reaching 0, and then the song resets to that point each time you pass a certain checkpoint. Then you get a more intense second segment, which ramps up the tension slightly. Then if you reach a point where you're starting to run out of time, the third segment will play, which is very chaotic and acts as a single riser with a sort of up and down progression, which increases in speed and intensity right up to the point where you either reach the checkpoint or run out of time entirely and the song reaches its resolution. That up and down progression you might recognise from the sonic drowning sound. Hillside Pass is one of the trickier courses in the game. It's unlikely you'll actually reach the end of the song. Instead you'll get dead ahead, the tragic sound, which is all key changes, strings ascending and raising that tension. There's also a droning synth which sounds almost like a theremin of some kind in the background during a lot of it, an instrument which often comes hand in hand with horror and somewhat spooky vibes. By the end of that one you have distorted basses, heavy guitars going on while the strings go dissonant and keep raising in pitch, and a moment where the guitar almost sounds like it's screaming in pain. In Gridlock USA, you'll hear the song Downtown Drift, which in my opinion is honestly the weakest track in the OST. It's pretty chill, but there isn't really much else to say about it, and it presents as rather quiet, especially in the beginning. I think that's why it's generally considered the worst one. The track is audibly much quieter than the previous tracks, especially when you're driving. With the sound of the engines, the quieter parts of the track are drowned out, leaving the mix with just this weird tinny guitar. And this track doesn't actually have its own tragic song, instead going over to Oversteer again. In the final race of the game, US Marathon EX and US Marathon, you'll hear the track Fatal Instinct as the tragic song. And it really is the be-all and end-all of horrifying songs, starting with rapid repetition of a saw wave in a tremolo and a fast beat. We get a hint of the melody with a lo-fi string sound. It's in E-flat minor, which Ernst Powell once noted was the darkest, most somber key of all, which you may or may not disagree with on the whole, but this track certainly emphasizes that and takes the cake. The beat tends to jump around too, going incredibly fast and unpredictable, while the strings make their way descending downwards, spiraling like your position in the rates. Then the break is this really pretty, echoing sine arpeggio. But we have to go back to the normal soundtrack. The main string is repeated in ostinato at a higher pitch, and by the end it's getting louder and louder and more intense before finally releasing. It's not as terrifying as when I was young, but all added up together you get a lot of tension. There are 2 unused tracks in the game, J-Rock and Oriental, presumably meant for an Asian or Japanese track, which didn't end up in the game. I quite like the beat and bass in the former alongside this sound effect, which is quite atmospheric, and the latter certainly works as a tragic variant, and I do enjoy the string melody in it. It actually sounds somewhat like Oversteer, where it uses that pitched down lo-fi chorus again. and the strings really speed up towards the end, and that held note right at the end does actually give me chills. Though I never got to hear it when I was young, so there's none of that nostalgia trauma. Once you've beaten the game, finished the last championship, you'll get a credit song. It uses the motif from the menu music with the sine riff but applied to its chord progression, alongside a descending string melody with occasional skips up a whole octave. There's also a distorted guitar as the bass track. Once again, though, you're not free from dissonance, as there are some spooky tones present, and then of course it ends on that intense rise. Now I believe this was used as some kind of trailer music, but I can't verify that. I heard it once and I've not heard it again. Now look, I'm not going to claim Burnout 1 as S tier, the best game in the series, but I think that, as all sequels should, the sequels improve on it in every way, but they have a completely different vibe, and I think it deserves a chance because of that. I like it a lot despite its somewhat traumatizing nature, and if I find a way to play through or drive, then I will do that too. Now, this is Tanya, signing off.